Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not normally talking with a microphone, so hopefully I won't be too loud because it's not normally my go-to move. I think I spoke at this same thing last year about the phase one of the initial start of the Act Review. As I said, I'm used to yelling and talking loudly to get my message across to a big room, but hopefully it won't go too bad. My name is Luke Stevens, as I introduced. Darrell Merritt, my boss, is just over there. Please tell her that I am awesome at my job. That'll go a long way to me not getting in trouble. Basically, the presentation I'm going to give today, on your program it said that it was going to be given by Dr. Ken Parker. Unfortunately, Ken's had a family emergency, so he's been taken away from the office for the last few days. So I'm left holding a can. I mean that in a nice way, of course. We're all involved in the Act Review, obviously. However, this particular part of it and financial health indicators is not my strong suit, and I'll freely admit that. So instead of talking in depth about financial health indicators, which Ken was going to do, I'm just going to be going through basically what we're going to be covering in the upcoming paper in relation, well, the Act Review broadly, but then also what's actually in the financial management paper. Okay, so hopefully I won't go too badly, and as I said before, it's not one of my topics, so while I've read a lot of information, I know some of the detail, I'm not across it as much as Ken would be. And that also means at times I might actually refer to my notes because obviously I do have written comments. Okay, so objects of the review. So basically the review is to transform local governments so they're empowered to better deliver quality governance and services to their communities now and into the future. Okay, introduce variations to the one-size-fits-all model that currently exists. As we all know, the department regularly gets comments, and the CEO of Minginyu mentioned it yesterday in a meeting at the department, and he again raised it this morning, that obviously there are different challenges that confront different sized local governments, which I'll talk about the diversity in the sector more broadly shortly, and to provide local governments with a framework which they can operate more effectively and still ensure accountability. Obviously, the state government's role in this whole process is to try to balance the competing interests of what the public expect in accountability and transparency with what local governments want to do. Okay, so that's kind of where we fit. And what we ultimately, well, you may not believe us, but what we are actually trying to achieve. Okay, or at least I can say from my point, I'm trying to achieve it. The timetable, discussion papers will be released very shortly, so in the coming weeks. The public comment on the discussion papers will be open until the 31st of March. So that's basically, I think it's just over 6 months. So there will be a long time for you guys to consider what's in there. And then after that, after we get all the consultation period closes, we'll then review the submissions, do what we do at the department. Then after Cabinet approves a bill, we'll draft a new bill, and then the bill will also go out for public comment, okay, before it actually gets read into Parliament. So that will take obviously a significant amount of time as well, and there'll be another consultation period to receive comments on the draft bill. The thing to remember with this particular review as well is that the intention is to draft a new Act at the end of this. Okay, so as I'm sure you can appreciate, the Local Government Act, from memory, has 464 pages and about 460 pages of regulations, if memory serves. Pieces of legislation for me is a hell of a lot of work to rewrite, so it is going to take a significant amount of time because it is a tier of government, and obviously time is important as well in the sense that we have to make sure we do it right, because this Act, when it comes in, will be the Act that will basically regulate this for the next 30 years. Okay, so the Act Review topics. As you can see, they're broken into 3 different headings: agile, smart and inclusive. I'm sure you remember those words from the last time we went around talking about the Act Review. So what we've learnt from phase 1 is that releasing one mammoth discussion paper wasn't exactly, didn't get the feedback that we were after, and didn't engage the community and the sector as much as we had hoped for. So what we've done now, we've broken it down. So instead of having one paper, we're going to have 11 different discussion papers, which will talk to those individual topics. Okay, so if you're interested in local law reform, then you read the local law one. If you're interested in admin efficiencies, you only need to read the admin efficiencies paper. Obviously, we encourage everyone to read all of them, but common sense says that people only read the topics that they're interested in. This way, we want to make it, well, that's a bit weird, a bit easier for everyone to find the topics they want. And as you'll notice, I think of most interest to the people in this room was obviously the agile topics, which is beneficial enterprises or council-controlled organisations is the way that WALGA has historically referred to it over the last few years. Financial management, and then obviously the whole rating framework is also being reviewed as well. Okay, the topics that are in the agile paper are investments, debt, procurement, annual reporting, and building upgrade finance. I'll talk about what's actually under those very shortly, but they are the broad headlines in that particular paper. Okay, financial management context. As I said, I'll briefly talk about all the stuff we already know about, but I'm going to say it anyway for clarity, is local governments fund and deliver critical infrastructure. Obviously, the whole purpose of you guys raising money is to be able to give critical infrastructure to your local communities. It must be done, as I said before, in a transparent and accountable way, and because pretty much we are managing public money, it's not our money that we do, just like the state government, we have to be very prudent in the way we spend. Obviously, if we can invest and use our money more effectively, ultimately it's a better outcome for the community. And this is why I just like to talk loudly. Okay, diversity in the sector. Okay, that is just a snapshot of annual operating expenditure across the sector. Okay, so the City of Stirling is that really, really big high one that's about $200 million annually. And I think it's Wood and Alling is the lowest one at 2.5 million. Approximately. Okay, so as you can appreciate, that is a very, very big diversity, especially when you look at something like the City of Stirling is, I think, 105 square kilometres and has 200,000 people in it, opposed to Sandstone that's over 35,000 square kilometres with 100 people in it. Okay, so obviously there is different challenges, and ultimately that's where the interesting part about the one-size-fits-all approach to regulation does, because ultimately how do we create a framework as a state government that enables the flexibility that is needed to reflect that diversity? It's definitely the challenge for us. Excuse me while I flick some pages over. Okay, so investments. As with everything under the Local Government Act, we start with the premise that you're autonomous bodies that can do what you want. So you can invest all the surplus funds. However, as we do, and a tendency to do, but you can't do this. Okay, so basically the Regulation 19C was introduced after the global financial crisis and the fallout from that. What we've learned... Sorry. Oops. What we've learned from there... Thank you, Candy. Candy has always been my favourite CEO of local government professionals. Yeah, so obviously that was introduced after the GFC. What we have found in reviews that the department have undertaken with West Australian Treasury Corp is that those actual restrictions don't actually relate to what is the most risky debts. So, for example, collateral debt obligations, which were the major problem that kicked off the GFC, technically you can still invest in them. So we need to relook at those restrictions. Do we actually need restrictions is another question. Ultimately, yes, there was, I think, $40 million from memory got lost in the sector through the GFC, but do we still need to keep restrictions? I don't know. I suppose what we're open to is what kind of, if we do need restrictions, what are sensible restrictions to have, opposed to just the ones that we currently have. Okay, so now the other thing is in the paper you'll find that we actually outline in the detailed paper, one thing I should say, there's two types of papers for each topic. There's a summary paper and a detailed paper. Okay, as I'm sure you can figure out from the title of that paper, the detailed paper has a lot more information in it. In the detailed paper, we actually outline all the different restrictions that local governments face around the country as well. So we're not just talking about us, we're going to show you what it is. And the thing that we found is there's no actual consistent approach adopted, surprise, surprise, throughout the Commonwealth. Who would have thought it? And so we're open to ideas, and we want to honestly look at what kind of restrictions, or do we need them at all? Possible reforms that we're looking at is maybe going away from the state government telling you what you can and can't do, that possibly a local government has to adopt a policy, and that policy has to be reviewed annually. So therefore it's up to the local government itself to figure out what kind of risks they're willing to wear. And obviously dependent on their financial advisors or financial managers within the local, organic to local government itself, council will have a different gauge on if they are more happy to take slightly riskier approaches to investment, opposed to generally regional local governments have a more measured or risk-adverse approach to it. So that's one of the things. The other one is also possibly I think the other one that's mentioned in the paper is about Tier 1 and Tier 2 investments, so possibly just trying to make it a bit easier for local governments that don't have the same sort of level of capacity to figure out some of these things themselves, that the state government might be able to assist in that regard as well, to do with, and that will have different oversight requirements. Debt. Everyone loves debt. State government loves debt. It's in all the papers. So is the federal government, apparently. Local governments don't like debt. State and federal governments love debt. We've got lots of it. Obviously, we regularly get told that we can't handle our finances, and that's something you should probably talk to Treasury about, not me. I'm a lawyer, not an accountant. But basically, as you all know, under the Act, you can only use the rates income basically as security on a loan. Okay, is that an appropriate use of your asset base? Arguably, probably not. So there's discussions around primarily about local governments being able to use freehold, assets owned in freehold as collateral on loans to try to encourage debt management. Obviously, debt is bad in one sense. Yes, there's an interest bill and all that sort of stuff, but there's also an argument that about should the taxpayer or the ratepayer of today have to fund critical infrastructure or large infrastructure purchases up front now, opposed to then doing it over the asset life. I'm not an accountant, as I said before. I don't know much about depreciations and things like that, but ultimately it makes sense to me, and the state government is definitely looking into, and we want to receive feedback on how we do that. The question, however, does become, if we say as a state government you can use all your freehold assets, what freehold assets shouldn't you do it over? And what I'm talking about there is there certain core assets that should not be used as leverage? And when I'm thinking like that, I'm talking about roads, footpaths, things like that. Now, in a topic forum we ran before, in the development of these discussion papers, we had a rather smart chap from West Australian Treasury Corp around there, and we're laughing about, who's going to want to, Macquarie Bank's not going to take out use a road as security for a loan. Well, there are toll roads in other states. You never know. It might be very profitable. I'd hate to be driving down Albany Highway and have to pay a toll. So who knows? But obviously, when we go back to this, the local government stance generally will be, of course, state government should get their fingers out of our job, out of our thing. We should be able to do what we want. Yep, that is true. But what I ask you is to look at these from a state government perspective as well, because ultimately there is a political risk as well to the state government if it lets you go to town and all of a sudden we end up with a toll road on Albany Highway because the city of Canning, because I'm at Canning, decided to not pay its bills and so on. Okay, so there are those other considerations that the state government obviously have to make. And I know it's probably not popular saying it in this room, but nonetheless already have. It's all good. Okay, procurement, my favourite topic. Okay, as we know, current tender threshold is $150,000. Sounds low. A number of exemptions do apply. The use of those exemptions are hit and miss throughout the sector, at least from the conversations I have with people, and the understanding of those exemptions, I might add too, and how they apply is actually very hit and miss. There is, again, no consistent approach across Australia. I think the tender thresholds across the country from memory, and again, it's in the detailed paper, they are actually outlined, is I believe it ranges from about 100K to 250K. The general benchmark is around the 150, 200 is kind of the average. We always like to compare the state government tender threshold, which is $250,000. The interesting thing with the state threshold is that we also have a lot more rules governing procurement in the state government than what applies broadly to local governments. So as you know, the tender threshold 150, below that, council makes a policy, you pretty much get to do what you wish with the council's endorsement. Whereas for the state government, we have the common use agreement, which is compulsory that we have to use, which severely restricts our ability. And yes, while we have a higher rule at 250K, the State Supply Commission very highly restricts everything we do in between that number as well. So obviously any consideration of 250K, just to explain how we will, well, at least how I'll be viewing it when we're going through all the submissions, things like that, is consideration of things like the CUA and the state government rules does come into play as well, okay? Now this could be a prime example of one size fits all approach. Can we tailor procurement rules to smaller local governments that are slightly more advantageous, or is it a matter of you go the other way and have it so there's more restrictive on smaller local governments because they don't have the organic capacity within their departments or their organisations to administer tendering properly? So do we then lift the rules and align them with state for, say, the band 1 local governments under the for the salary, using a salary and allowances tribunal band, because they are the larger ones, which arguably, and by analogy, you could probably compare them more to state government operations because of their size. So I'm not trying to preempt anything there, but I'm just going to explain how we're going to be viewing all the submissions that ultimately you guys put in and what kind of lens we use. As it says there, the Auditor General, obviously, as you know, is now auditing, and I believe someone from the OIG is talking this afternoon as well. Their performance audits, and that will also obviously guide our policies, because we'll be doing, obviously the department will be talking with the Office of Auditor General to see what they think we should be doing. Procurement is also one of those things, as I'm sure you'll agree, gets a lot of bad publicity from time to time. The CCC in particular has certain comments about it, and so does our investigative colleagues in the department have issues with tendering from time to time, and that's also something that needs to be considered while we're going through those. Okay, the other things we're talking about procurement is timely payment of suppliers. The Auditor General recently released a report about that topic. I think it was 10 local governments they did the audit on. He found that the majority of local governments, or at least sampled, don't have good or robust policies in relation to the timely payment of suppliers. Recently, we were asked about how fast does the state government have to pay. So we went, that's an interesting question, because I actually hadn't looked that up. I can assure you, Treasury instruction, I think it's 323 from memory, tells us that 30 days is what the state government has to do. And again, that's, I suppose, and that's another example of how the state government actually has a hell of a lot of regulation around what we actually get up to, even though we might have cooler numbers. There's a lot more stuff behind it. So, regional price preferencing, regional CCI, and someone else, which I can't remember off the top of my head, probably LG Pro, I think it might have been, have made submissions about raising the regional price preference up to 250K, which is again from 50, which is the same as the state government. We are considering that. There are some interesting flow-on effects when you think about the budget scalings of a council that has a $2.5 million operating revenue, raising that, basically giving someone a discount on a tender for 250K, when you've only got an operating revenue of 2.5 million, and bear in mind, all those, generally the ones with a small regional, is an interesting sort of thing there. So there are pitfalls to also raising that threshold, although there is also advantages when it comes to local jobs and all that sort of stuff. So that's also something else we have to consider. Authorisation of payments. Regularly we hear from local government staff that the way that is done, and the production of the report every month where council then goes through what you've spent basically on the credit card, is problematic and blurs that line between administration and council itself. We are looking at that, and I suppose what we're looking at is, at the end of the day, council, they are responsible overall for the operations of the local government itself. So we are never going to be able to take them out of the whole picture. So it's about trying to get that balance, I suppose. The recommendations have been that possibly we should regulate or add a threshold to say that CEOs can spend up to so much. Now that is fraught, as I'm sure you can appreciate, with danger as well in itself. So we're definitely interested to detail comments as well, and assessments. Now, I suppose, where possible, of what kind of the pros and cons are. Because, you know, while I'll freely admit that I'm a pretty smart cookie, I don't think of everything. And so any information and practical examples are really helpful for us to try to get that right sort of balance, and not view it through the lens of I want to do everything I want, because you don't always get what you want. Yeah? You get what you need sometimes. I think it was Mick Jagger song, wasn't it? But yeah, so, and again, what it is what we're trying to achieve out of this review is we're trying to get that right balance to make it easy for you guys to do your jobs, but also ensure that there's still accountability and the transparency the government wants, or the public expects, I should say. Disposal of property, it's not covered in the paper. We spoke about that as part of the first discussion paper we released. We've got that feedback, and we decided that we weren't going to change any of that without changing the remainder. So we've already got that feedback. It's not that we've forgotten about it. Any changes to that will come as part of phase 2, so, or at the end of this process. Okay, annual reports. Again, one-size-fits-all approach. Smaller local governments have a tendency to query why they have to do annual reports, being that it takes so much time. I'm pretty sure that our department, which has just finished writing their annual report, didn't enjoy doing it. All state and federal government agencies write annual reports. One of the analogies that get drawn when local governments are saying that they shouldn't have to do an annual report is to do with charities. If you actually, and it's in the paper, if you actually have a look at what the rules regarding charities are, if you basically have a charity that has an operating revenue of more than $1 million, you have to do an audited annual report. It's no different. So, being that our smallest local government is 2.5, their analogy is quite average, to say the least. So while we talk about annual reports, obviously there is always going to have to be some kind of annual reporting system. That is just a fact. It's not going to change. Currently we have 7 ratios, as you know, that indicate financial health. They were set up a number of years ago. Now ratios are used in the public sector broadly to talk about financial health. What those ratios are always a bone of contention. We know that. There is, as it says, there's no consistent approach across the country, which makes it difficult to compare local governments from state to state and things like that. Ultimately, what we want to know from you guys in this room is what while you don't like our indicators, that's fine. What indicators should we use to judge your financial health? It's something that we're more than likely going to keep. I can't see us getting rid of it, but we will change it if there is a good reason, an argument behind what kind of structure we should adopt instead. So we're willing and able to change whatever you want in that regard, but we need to have a reason and a good rationale behind it. And as I said, Ken is the financial health indicator guru guy. I know that they're there, they're in your annual report, and they end up on my council, and there's a funky looking web graph. That's about the extent of my knowledge about financial indicator. I'll freely admit that, but yeah. Okay, building upgrade finance. Has everyone heard of this phenomenon? Out of curiosity? Most people have? No? Show of hands, so I'm not talking to myself. A few people. Okay, building upgrade finance is something that the City of Perth and the Property Council are pushing at the moment. For them, advantageously, because we happen to be doing a review into the financial management, so it is also a topic that's covered in the papers. Basically, building upgrade, I should say, is a scheme where local governments administer loans on behalf of a bank or financier to non-residential building owners to upgrade their buildings. So in Victoria, South Australia and New South Wales, I think it is, they use it to fund green type upgrades to buildings. So it might not be financially viable necessarily to put solar panels on the roof of a major building. So that's where they're kind of doing in that green development space. The Property Council and the City of Perth are arguing that it could be used as a vehicle to promote urban renewal or to particularly in the City of Perth. Obviously, there is sectors of the City of Perth that could be regenerated, I suppose. There's trouble getting finance there because of the economic downturn. They're viewing this as a vehicle to try to capture some of that sort of stuff. It involves three parts. Basically, the builder owner agrees to undertake the works, the financier agrees to give them the money, and then the local government recoups the actual loan itself via basically a service charge. So it basically using the rates mechanism. So there's additional charge on their rates. The interesting legal part to this is the loan is actually tied to the property opposed to the person or the entity that owns the building, which is different. So obviously if they on-sell that, the person that currently owns that building on-sells it, then the new owner actually gets that liability of the loan. So and so that is the different, interesting, I personally find it the interesting sort of part of this is that actually the debt runs with the property, not the person, which is unusual in a broad sense. But it's definitely something that we're considering. So, okay, as I said, related topics is beneficial enterprises or council-controlled organisations, rates and administrative efficiencies. I won't bore you with the details what's inside those papers. They'll be released shortly and I'm sure you can read them. Okay, so the questions, and this is the second last slide, so I won't be going for much longer. The questions we'd like you to consider are, obviously local government's very different, but what powers and responsibilities should be different? So the interesting thing that I've personally found talking to people around the sector about this is that if you take procurement rules, for example, one of the topic forums we ran about procurement is you had the small local governments basically said, we can't do this, it's too onerous to follow all these stupid pesky rules that you state government people put on us because there's only 10 of us. We can't do it. Yeah, okay, cool. Righto, so we'll relax the rules and we'll get rid of it. Then the major metros turn around and go, oh, this 150K, that's ridiculous. That costs, that's nothing for us. It's a drop in the bucket for Sterling at their $200 million operating revenue. We're big enough, we're capable, we don't need all this oversight. Okay, so we'll raise yours and we'll get rid of rules for you. So that just relates to 2 and 3, bands say 2 and 3, that sort of middle bucket, they have to do tender rules. It's kind of it's an unusual approach, and then you can, when you're having the conversations with people and when we're having that discussion, ultimately it's very difficult to find where it's appropriate to tailor something and where it's appropriate to have a blanket rule. If you guys can come up with things, we're all ears, I'm open to it. The regular ones that we talk about when we're talking about tailoring, it's because obviously if we tailor it or go away from one size fits all approach, what we need to do is create some kind of mechanism to be able to categorise councils, because obviously that has to fundamentally underlie it. So the mechanisms that we talk about in the papers are salary and allowances tribunal bans, because they are fairly stable and they're obviously well known about. You've got the risk ratios. Obviously the department does risk scores on local governments. They are more capable of fluctuation, and I'll use City of Perth as an example. City of Perth currently has a very bad risk score. Obviously, there's an inquiry panel inquiry into the City of Perth. Hence why, whereas normally when you look at its financials and its capability, it would not normally be sitting in that risk score. So that's a bit volatile. Then you've got operating expenditure. So it's basically how much money you have and how capable. Because generally, if you've got more money, you're going to have more staff and you're going to have more capacity. So we do talk about those. I do ask that you critically assess that and try to figure out a good mechanism. If you guys have got a better mechanism that we can use, please feel free to suggest that as well. We are open to any suggestion in this matter. How can the Act improve financial health and sustainability? Major metros, I don't think broadly has a problem with sustainability and financial health. However, the smaller regional ones do. So if there's anything that we can do to assist that, please let us know and we'll see what we can do. Should it be a case of better regulation rather than less regulation? Everyone doesn't like to be regulated. I think that's across the board with all demographics and all activities. No one wants to be told how they can and can't do something, but ultimately there has to be some level of regulation. So how can we improve it and make it better and work for people? And what regulation, in this case, financial management, what does good regulation look like? Yeah. Have your say. Okay. What I will say before we take some questions, which hopefully won't be too hard, is the way that we're doing the consultation or getting feedback from the consultation is obviously send us an email with written comments if you want, be it in a proper letter or via an email saying, hey dude, regulation 12 sucks, you know, whatever. That probably won't be much use, but you know what I mean, send us an email. But what we're also doing is creating a whole bunch of SurveyMonkey surveys for each particular topic. I think the average time to go through those surveys is literally 10 or 12 minutes. They're not in depth. The original surveys that we wrote up were quite long, and when I trialled the first one, which I can't remember what topic it was on, I sat there after about 10 minutes wanting to stab my eye out. And so we've made them a lot shorter and more condensed. But obviously we are taking some, I hadn't moved my hand, Candy. We're opening to taking submissions on anything via any mechanism, okay? So just bear that in mind. So has anyone got any? Thank you for listening to me. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much and hopefully I made some sense out of the presentation I literally whipped up yesterday. And has anyone got any questions? Hopefully to Darrell.
Luke, Dean from the Shire of Harvey. One quick question, a bugbear of mine in relation to rates is
She does rates.
Charitable purposes. Is there going to be a definition? We've been told that it's going to be dealt with as part 2 or part B of this review, just seeing if that's still the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, Dean, it is included in the rates paper. So the rates, fees and charges paper is looking at exemptions in a general sense as well. So should everyone have to pay rates or is there some categories that should be exempt and charitable is included in that? There's a couple of options for definitions. How do we try and make charitable definition better? You know, is there some criteria around that? So that is also addressed in the paper. Yeah.
Hi, Bonnie from the town of Victoria Park. I just was wondering if you could give the group an overview of the main items that have been coming through. So in terms of the phase 1, was there anything specific that was overwhelming from feedback that you received in any of those points?
You mean the topics that we're going forward with from phase 1?
Yeah.
Differential rates is a big one. Well, not even rates in general is a big one, and changing the definition of rural versus non-rural in the case of method evaluation. So that's not being touched in phase 2, only because the Valuer General's office are actually doing a review at the moment. So hopefully once they've come up with whether there's a better mechanism for the valuing of properties, then we'll consider what needs to change in the Local Government Act. So if they might change, instead of using gross rental value and unimproved value, there's other alternatives, you know, capital improved value and things like that. So once they've done their review, then we'll start working on what needs to change in the Local Government Act. General feedback, it was very varied. So there's not really one key thing that came out other than less regulation. The alternative to that, though, is, well, we did the topic forums back in July, and so that's why I'm not sure if did anyone attend the topic forums that we held in the city. So that was really interesting, especially in the terms of procurement and financial management. And Ken ran the session on procurement, and he's, if we could wipe the slate clean and start again, what does financial management and what does procurement and what does debt look like? And within an hour or so, it came back, you know what? Actually, what we've got's pretty good. It works, but it needs to be tweaked. So that was really interesting feedback that has come forward. So that's what we're looking at in these papers that Luke's just talked about. The other thing that came out was, well, we're happy for change, but can you make sure it's detailed enough so we know what we have to do? So that's the other thing, is that people are saying, no, we don't want regulation. However, I'll make sure it's clear so we know exactly what we're having to do. So that's what we're trying to balance going forward with the review is what does that look like? Don't regulate us, but give us enough information so we can do the right thing. So yeah, that's the challenge going forward, especially coming into phase 2, and the rewrite of the Act is where do we draw the line? So it'll be interesting to see the feedback that comes through. Now that we've got the extended period of consultation through to the end of March, that's really great because it gives us time to work with you guys. If you want to have a catch up, if you've got some ideas you want to share, please contact us because we want to listen, we want to hear, we need to understand from you guys who are dealing with this legislation every day, what is impeding you doing your job, what can make it better, so that we can put that forward.
Yeah, hi, Phil from the Shire of Dardanup. Just 2 questions. The first one's around differential rates. You sort of touched on that. That obviously is a very convoluted process and there's lots of trips that you can come across if you don't do it properly. Is that flagged as a simplification process? Is that sort of the general feedback you're getting?
Yeah, so differential rates is an interesting one. So some of the options put forward in the paper, where it really becomes tricky is when the ministerial approval is required. So if it's more than twice, you have to write to the seek approval from the minister, which is delegated to the department, application forms, all sorts of information that has to be provided. So there's a couple of options that we're going to flag in the paper for reforms in that, whether it's increasing the current differential, so instead of it being 2 times the lowest before you seek ministerial approval, do we up it to 3 or 4 times before you seek ministerial approval, but there's still ultimately that ministerial approval at the end of it? Or do we get rid of the ministerial approval and we just say you can have a maximum of 4 times the lowest and work within those confines? So there's a couple of options being flagged, the models used in other jurisdictions already. One of the interesting things with that is that in other jurisdictions they've got rate capping, but they don't have this ministerial approval process, whereas we don't have rate capping and we've got that ministerial approval process. So I don't know what the best outcome is. I don't know what would work better. The mining sector, of course, are the ones that are really pushing for reforms in this. So we're also looking at introducing a rate and revenue strategy in that consultation paper for rates. So that would cover all your objects and reasons, your rates in the dollars, your fees and charges, putting that all into one document and consulting on that rather than doing it as a separate process. So that's something else that we're flagging in relation to that in the rates sort of context, bringing your fees and charges out of your annual budget and popping them into this annual rate strategy, so you don't have to worry about trying to set those at the time of your budget. Makes it easier to change throughout the year as well. So there's a couple of ideas, but if you've got more ideas about diff rates, love to hear them, because it is a bugbear of a lot of people, especially the development of objects and reasons. Are rates a tax? Are they a service charge? Can you put in your objects and reasons that they can afford to pay it, so therefore they should pay more? All those sort of things. I don't know where we end up with it.
Okay, thanks. A second question, just about the accounting manual, the Department's accounting manual. I don't know if that's something that you guys can comment on, but is there a plan to review that and update that at the moment?
Not that I'm aware of. That's not within our team. And I think probably going forward as part of the review will probably need to be reviewed at the end of it. But as far as I'm aware, there's not a plan underway to review that now.
No other questions? Luke, Darrell, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Luke, great presentation. So well done. Thank you.